The International Monetary Fund says South Africa needs to implement reforms to put the economy on a continuous and inclusive growth path. It's also outlined 3 challenges that stunt economic growth. The organisation has released an article, a report in fact, focusing on several issues including the economic outlook, private investment as well as job creation. To talk about this further, I have with me in studio tonight economist Lumkile Mondi. Very good evening to you, Lumkile. Thank you for coming in. So, low growth, not much confidence in the government's ability to act on policy. Reform is not looking great. Not the report card any country wants to bring home. How do we act on this message that we keep getting back from the IMF, from the ratings agencies?
I think perhaps looking at other African countries' experiences, that the African leadership has to fail before it wakes up. We've seen across the Limpopo River how Zimbabwe has continued on a downward slide with an influx or outflow of people into South Africa and other neighboring countries, and nothing has changed for Zimbabweans. So perhaps South Africa has to fail before it starts taking seriously that it's in a crisis, and being in a crisis means we need leadership, decisive leadership. We need serious structural reforms. We need to focus on growth, because when there's growth, opportunities are created, and we're able to touch a number of areas, whether it's people's lives improving because of access to opportunities, tax revenues increasing because companies are growing, and also from personal income tax. So without that, really, I think South Africa, in fact, even the president, has yet to talk about economic crisis. It's as though everything is okay, we're all in control of what's going on, and yet, as we were speaking earlier, with the SCOPA chairperson, you can see that this country is not in good shape at all.
So you say we need to let things break.
Yeah.
Some would argue that things have already broken. Unemployment is nearing the 30% mark. Public health services and other public services, our level of education, for example, you look at our outcomes in mathematics and science, not the greatest. You look at ESCOM, it's been flagged as the biggest risk to our fiscal situation. Are we not at that breaking point already?
Well, 6 months ago, we're still in the same position, and about 57% of eligible voters went to the polls and voted for the same party. So there's something that 57% knows, as well as those that in government understand, that, a government that in the past 10 years has spent trillions of rands and yet has had very little impact on gross fixed capital formation. As the IMF, in its consultation for Article 4, in the statement that it released, highlighted that investment has not shown any improvement in the economic outlook. We have high birth rate and a very low growth scenario. More importantly, we continue as universities churning out graduates with very little prospect of getting employment opportunities. So it's a crisis. And so up until South Africans really, President stands here with you, Tembekile, and say, no, Mr. Mkhototo, we're in an economic crisis. South Africans, we have to do things differently. We have to tighten our belt, we have to work harder, we have to work together. Until that message comes through, at the moment, with all the strikes, all the bailing out, and all the problems, it seems as though we can patch here, patch there, and get on with it. And we're not seeing it, at least the results aren't showing it in terms of job figures, in terms of growth figures, but more important, in terms of really fast investment that will drive economic growth going forward.
You mentioned bailouts and SOEs again in this IMF report based on the meeting that they had with the South African representatives recently. SOEs come up again as a great risk to South Africa's economic potential. But we're still stuck in the same spot. We was having the same debate 5 years ago whether we need to privatize, go for a mixed set-up at SAA and ESCOM, for example. But no one is speaking with any finality. People had said Tito Mboweni seems to be quite steadfast in where things should go. But given the ANC's history with the labor movements as well, it doesn't seem we're going to move in any radical direction, doesn't it?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Remember that any expansion that you put into a company is supposed to be growth enhancing. Our public sector spend, including our SOE spend in recent years, has all been trying to fill a shortage. which is not growth enhancing at all. We just had an agreement with unions at SAA. All these are not growth enhancing at all. So therefore, up until we take serious decision about what is this South Africa that we want, where the state cannot be throwing money into a pit, as we've seen across many areas, whether it's ESCOM, etc. When you know that technology has caught up, that with renewables, we're able to produce much more efficiently, we're able to ensure that in the production of that energy, we can create new industries, and yet we're still stuck on keeping ESCOM as is. So there's so much that has to happen, I think, until South Africa wakes up. That's why my argument is that perhaps maybe we need to fail, because in a crisis, everyone is happy, everyone is smiling, as though things are very good in our country, and yet we know they're not.
I was quite taken reading this IMF summary today, because one of the other issues that they talk about is market dominance, and how government has to an extent not done well enough in limiting that, so that small, medium enterprises can grow and flourish, which is an interesting point to raise, because whenever the budget is released, when we hear talk from the President in the State of the Nation address, just 2 weeks ago, I had the Small Business Development Minister in this very chair saying, we're doing our best to help SMEs, but everyone agrees that SMEs are not getting enough help in this country. What needs to shift?
So, Tembekile, on the eve of our democracy in 1994, we had 5 conglomerates controlling about 83% of the economy. The ANC agreed with those companies that they can unbundle and they can internationalize. And those companies were controlling key sectors of economy. So basically they were allowed to just change here and there, and some of them internationalized. As you know, with Anglo-American now has almost left the country, with it closing down many of its operations. So a lot of these are ANC policy choices that they chose to keep the economy as it was, and that's why ESCOM and others are still so dear to them, because these are institutions of an apartheid economy which was meant to serve whites only, a smaller population than the rest of the people.
Is it going to take us another 25 years then to fix it?
Probably even longer, with the seriousness of this government and the leadership that we have, that they're not sending the message. The IMF is saying, you've got a policy that Tito has presented, embark on it, lead. And yet we know that's not going to happen, because there is no seriousness about dealing with the serious issues and making sure that South Africa embarks on social reform will drive growth and growth, so that through growth we're able to create those opportunities that we need to create in the economy.
Economist Lumkile Mondi, thank you so much for coming in tonight.